Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon for today's IWF Reads Author Chat. I'm Kelsey Bolar, a senior policy analyst at Independent Women's Forum. I'm excited to join all of you today, of course, with our very special guest of honor, Allie Beth Stuckey. Before bringing Allie on screen, I want to quickly give you a few pointers on how to engage with us today on this virtual event platform. We have a chat room on the right side of your screen where you can join the discussion with other attendees and my IWF teammates who will have a T next to their names. If you don't see the chat room, you can select the arrow at the top right corner to open that chat window. Next to the chat room tab, there is a questions tab. If you have a question for Allie, please post it in the questions tab. You can give other attendees questions bumps by hitting the up arrows, and that will help me find those questions easier and faster so that I can ask them to Allie on your behalf. Towards the end of our time with Allie today, we'll be drawing and announcing 3 names to win 3 copies of her book, You're Not Enough, and That's Okay. In order to win, you must be present during the drawing at the end of today's event. The books will be mailed to our door prize winners. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Allie Beth Stuckey, host of the podcast Relatable, one of my personal favorites, and author of one of my also favorite books, You're Not Enough, and That's Okay. Allie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I like that we're both in theme with our reds and pink, sort of a Valentine's Day edition. And I have my book
I love
right
that
here.
hot pink. Also pink. Perfect.
All right, guys. Well, I'm going to kick it off with my own questions as I monitor this question tab from all of you. So in honor of Valentine's Day this weekend, Allie, I just want to ask your thoughts. Is this a real holiday? Is it something we should celebrate? Is it something you celebrate? And, if you can also address or explain how the quest for self-love and to love yourself is actually making ourselves more miserable.
Yeah, of course. So I actually just recorded today's episode of Relatable, and I decided to take a break from news and politics to talk about the subject of love, what it is. And sure, I do celebrate Valentine's Day just kind of in a casual way. I don't put a lot of hope or stock into it or anything like that. My husband doesn't have to, cover our carpet with roses or anything, but it can just kind of be another fun way to celebrate with your significant other or even with your friends. It can just be another excuse to celebrate, which I think is fun and probably needed right now, especially as we kind of drone on in this monotony of being at home and being separated and being fragmented. Any reason to kind of do something different and fun, I think, can be good for people. And so I am certainly not going to rain on your Valentine's Day parade. But I do think it's important. I'm obviously a Christian, and this book is written from a Christian perspective. And I think it's important, especially as Christians, for us to get love right, for us to know what love means, that it's not just tolerance, that it's not just lust, it's not the same thing as jealousy, it's not the same thing as desire, that it actually has a very real meaning. There are different kinds of love. C.S. Lewis wrote about this in his book, The Four Loves. He talks about familial love, friendship love, romantic sexual love, and then also the greatest of all loves, which is agape love. And that is that kind of unconditional, selfless, sacrificial love that God shows to us through Christ, and also as Christians that we are compelled, empowered, called to do for others, to love our neighbor as ourselves. Now, when people hear that particular verse, love your neighbor as yourself, a lot of times they think, well, that means that I have to feel affection towards myself or like myself or not be self-conscious or not be insecure before I can go out and love other people. But the beautiful thing about agape love, this unconditional love that God shows us and God calls Christians to do, is that it's not predicated on our ability to like ourselves, because self-love is very superficial. It can change based on our emotions, on our mood, on our circumstances, on what people say about us. And if we wait around until we have the perfect feelings about ourselves to go out and show that kind of sacrificial love to other people, we're going to be missing out on the fulfillment that generosity and sacrifice and love actually brings to us. It's a lie, unfortunately, that culture has fed women that before you can be committed in a relationship, before you can get married, before you can have kids, before you can go out and serve your neighbor or serve the vulnerable, feed the poor, whatever it is, before you can obey God in every area of your life, you have to have a perfect amount of self esteem and self adoration and self liking. The fact of the matter is that we're never going to accomplish that. And what I call for is certainly not self loathing, but to see ourselves rightly as God sees us. We are made in the image of God. All of our gifts, our physical, emotional, spiritual capabilities are gifts to be stewarded for His glory. They're not to be self-serving. So we see ourselves in that way. We appreciate the agape, unconditional love that God has shown us. And we realize that that is the power. God's love, not self-love, is the power that we need to go out and to love other people. That's such a more freeing kind of love than the kind of narcissistic, superficial love that culture tells us that we have to master before we can serve other people. And it's a much better reason to celebrate something like Valentine's Day than the very temporal and the very, surface level kinds of love and lust and hollow definitions of love that the world tells us that we have to celebrate.
Well, let's talk about the role that social media plays in this self-love culture and the attempt to sort of filter out the good versions of this unconditional love you talk about versus this toxic self-love culture. Social media, in my opinion, can be so toxic, and it can be tempting to
Yes.
choose sort of the Benedict option and just leave it all together. I'm sure you felt tempted to do this. I have felt tempted to do this. But
Yes.
then, I come across platforms like yours, which have a really positive influence on me and the way that I'm thinking. And it's actually helpful to be fed that type of real, true, empowering content versus, all the other toxic messages. So, in your opinion, does social media do more good than harm? And how can girls and women filter out the toxic self-love messages that, quite frankly, feel impossible at times to avoid on these platforms?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I agree with you. Social media can be such a toxic place, not just when it comes to the false messages that are coming either from professing Christians or people who aren't Christians, whoever it is, especially towards women. I call this in my book the paradox of perfection, that women are constantly coddled and told that we're perfect the way that we are, that we don't have flaws, that we don't have faults, that everything that has gone wrong in our lives or that we feel negatively about ourselves is all society's fault, that it's nothing actually inherently wrong with us, that everyone else and every other system is constantly to blame, that we're actually perfect the way we are. But we're simultaneously marketed to and sold to by all of these self help gurus telling us, yes, you're perfect the way you are, but if you really want to be perfect, then you need to follow my 10-step plan to self fulfillment or entrepreneurship or losing weight or whatever it is. And so women are caught in this hamster wheel of telling ourselves that we're perfect already while trying to really actualize that, like trying to really become that. I mean, we see that certainly in woke culture, that simultaneously they're propagating the message that self love is the highest form of holiness and the highest form of righteousness that you can attain. But by the way, unless you do all of these things, say the right language, read the right books, do the right, social justice, politically correct steps to truly be a good person, then you are fatally flawed and you are cancelable. And so we see this very toxic world of simultaneously seeming like it doesn't have any standards and then having impossible to reach standards. And I think that it's just our responsibility as discerning people to take a step back and to say, okay, I don't live by these people's standards. Like the worldly definitions of what is right, what is wrong, what is love, what is hate, what is good, what is bad, what is true, what is false. I am not beholden to those standards. And that is the freedom that I think we find in the gospel, that God is our supreme standard bearer as our great moral lawgiver. He gives us what objective truth is. So we're not on this hamster wheel of trying to find ourselves and trying to be ourselves, but simultaneously trying to be something else, trying to say that we're perfect the way we are, but trying to reach other people's standards of perfection. And so if we want to continue to engage on social media, we first have to be aware of that hamster wheel. We first have to be aware of that paradox and realize we're not beholden to anyone's standards except for God's. And thankfully, the good news of the gospel is that Jesus has already reached that standard on our behalf. If you are a Christian, you have already been made righteous and acceptable before God. It doesn't matter if you're righteous or acceptable before cancel culture. It is his standards and his commands that we are empowered by the Holy Spirit to conform to. And so, as long as we remove ourselves, I think, from the chaos and the bullying and the pressure that we see building on social media, and we use it in positive ways, either to share encouragement, to share our perspective, what we believe is true, to engage with people that we like, to have good conversations, I think, of course, it can be a good place. But it can't be the place where we are finding our worth. It can't be the place where we are finding our identity. It can't be the place where we are learning how to define justice or truth or righteousness or morality or any of those things. It can't be the place where we primarily learn our theology. Now, as someone who shares a lot about theology and politics, I'm, very glad if people do learn from me, but I don't want to be people's primary source of what truth is. I'm not the arbiter of that, and no one else should be either. Like, the terrible theology that we see displayed on TikTok is a good indication of, like, we probably shouldn't be getting our worldview from there. And so, as Christians, like, we just have this freedom and this privilege of being able to get our worldview and our theology from the Word of God Himself. I've got a long list of resources on my website, alliebethstuckey.com, of different books, theological, political, economic, that I think that people can read. And so, as long as social media is like a supplement to our life or a complement to our life and not our life, not our worldview, not where we're deriving all of our value, I think it can be okay. But it's up to us to be disciplined and be discerning and striking that balance.
Right. And it's so important for young girls, especially, to remember that social media is not real. It is people's highlight reels. And it's so tempting to compare yourselves, to that blogger, that you follow. And for me personally, what's been helpful to me is to unfollow people that I find myself comparing myself to in an unhealthy way. Sure. So filtering your own social media feed, like greatly reducing the amount of people that you follow could be helpful. And I did see there's one question for someone who is anti-social media, which I totally respect, about how they can follow you, Allie, without, besides for your podcast. And I would point them to your website. Is there anything else you would add for those who are anti-social media?
Yes. So I don't really post anywhere else. Obviously, my podcast is 4 times a week, and so you hear a lot from me there. I don't really necessarily post blog posts on my website. That's something I want to do. That's like a goal that I have. But at the end of every week, I'm like, I feel like I don't have time to do it. So I'm hoping at some magical point in my life, I will come up with time to do that. But I mean, right now it is mostly my podcast. I post on Instagram. Honestly, I've taken a big step back from social media as well. After the whole like Twitter purge, where so many people were kicked off Twitter, so many people left Twitter, to me, it just hasn't quite been the same. And I haven't been quite as engaged on there. Sometimes I feel like, okay, I'm missing out, as Kelsey knows, like there is this sense of urgency sometimes in this world to make sure that you get your take out there, to make sure that you react to something or whatever. But it's actually kind of been nice to take a step back and to remove that urgency from my mind and just kind of remember that it doesn't really matter. And thankfully, Twitter is not real life. It's not indicative of what everyone thinks or who everyone is. So I respect you, person who you're not on social media. It'd be hard for me to keep up with what's going on without it, I think. But I'm sure that you are a lot less anxious than a lot of people are who spend their time on Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere.
Right. Well, for those who are on Instagram, I highly encourage you to follow Allie. And specifically, this is a constant theme I want to hit on. We just need to get your book in front of young girls everywhere. If only I had read your book in high school or college, which gets me to the next question I wanted to ask about how in your book you shared your very personal struggle with an eating disorder, where you went from restricting calories, working out twice a day, and eventually started purging your meals. Then you wrote about how you went on to start partying and drinking to numb the pain from a bad breakup. And, sadly, experiences like that are hardly unique. I had some of my own along those lines. And in my opinion, high school and college are some of the hardest years of a young woman's life. I promise everyone. I mean, for me, I haven't made it too far into my 30s, but my 30s have been far better. So besides for sending every girl who's struggling with these issues a copy of your book, which I wish we could do, how can we reach them, and what helped you personally see the light?
Yes. So I think that first we have to look in our own small spheres of influence. A lot of times we believe this lie that in order to have influence on other people, we have to be an influencer. So we have to have a certain number of followers or podcast subscribers, or we have to have a kind of platform or a certain title or authority that would get people to listen to us. That's not necessarily true. There are people probably in your life, or maybe a couple degrees of separation, whether it's, like the youth group at your church, or your child's friends, or your niece, your nephew, who maybe they need a good influence. Maybe they need guidance. Maybe they need help in their lives, just kind of knowing how to make decisions, especially navigating a lot of the isolation that so many are dealing with. As Kelsey said, middle school, high school, college, those are all really hard times. And I went through those times basically without social media. We just didn't have we didn't have Instagram or Snapchat or anything like that when I was in high school. It wasn't very popular when I was in college. And already those times were hard. Struggling with body image and insecurity and self-consciousness and comparison was already hard without all of the applications that now kids have in their hands, not to mention the filters that make them look like different people. So like levels of body dysmorphia and all of that, and true depression and anxiety among kids, I think exacerbated, if not caused by social media, is just off the charts. And it certainly has been made worse over this past year as they have been forced in front of screens. And so you have no idea the teens and the young women in your life who may need someone just like you to befriend them. And this is a kind of love, and talking about love in light of Valentine's Day, that I think like a lot of us neglect in some ways, especially inside the church, this kind of deep, profound, intimate friendship love. We live in this very hyper individualized society to where we're okay with superficial friendships, and we're okay with maybe our little cliques, but reaching out to people who are truly lonely and saying, I want to bear your burdens along with you. I think a lot of young people in particular are not familiar with that kind of friendship. And so showing young people how to create those friendships, how to create that kind of community, seeking out young people to mentor, to influence, whether it's walking them, through my book. That's not what I'm trying to necessarily say, but that's something that you could do or start out doing, walking them through a book of the Bible, or just talking to them and meeting with them. That's an excellent way to have influence, because we are not necessarily responsible to change everyone's mind. That's something that I've had to remind myself very often. But we are called to have influence in the small plot of earth on which God has placed all of us. That's all really that we can do and be called to do. And that is enough. So you don't have to be an influencer to have influence. And chances are there are people, young people in your life, who need your wisdom and need your experiences and need your mentorship. And so I encourage people to seek that out as much as they can. It really can make a big difference in your community.
So I know you have a podcast to get to. I want to squeeze in 2 more questions, so let's try to keep them kind of brief.
Yeah.
But in the question tab here, we have 2 sort of along the same lines from Lisa asking if you find you're able to get through with this message to people who are atheists or those who are so self-sufficient seeming or self-affirming that they can't relate to the idea of not being enough. I would challenge, like, who are those people? Because we've all felt that at some point in our lives. And then also, MI says, I am, it seems like she or he is not hearing much as a Jew, as a non-Christian. And so do you find through your work you're able to penetrate and connect with people who do have different religious beliefs as you? Because yes, your message is Christian, but in my opinion, it's a lot more.
Yeah. So I get messages every week, I would say, if not every other week. I don't want to exaggerate at all, but probably every week, from people who are Jewish, people who are atheists, people who are agnostic, or people who just say, I'm not religious, but I love your book, or I love what you have to say, or like your story spoke to me, or something like that. It is definitely relatable to people of all belief systems. Now, of course, there's going to be some disagreement in what I posit are the solutions, and there's going to be some theological disagreements too, but it's a lot about human nature, that we are made insufficient, we're made fallible, we're made imperfect, and that we all long for belonging and purpose and fulfillment. And the kind of premise is my book is that the self can't be both the problem and the solution. So if inside yourself you're finding insecurity and doubt and inadequacy, or whatever it is, you're not going to be able to find the solutions to those things inside yourself. You've got to look outside of yourself. And my argument is, namely, to the God who created us. Now, thankfully, by the grace of God, there have also been people who say, oh, I read your book, or I listened to your podcast, and I heard the gospel for the first time, and my mind changed, my worldview changed, my faith changed. I don't take credit for that. Obviously, I glorify God for that. But that's also what I encourage people in, is that minds change. I've seen it happen. I see it happen all the time. Minds change, hearts change. People go from pro-choice to pro-life. People go from atheist to believing in God. Hearts and minds can change, and don't downplay your power, at least through the strength of God, to be able to change people's hearts and minds, because it's definitely possible.
I want to end with one question that kind of touches on current events. So you're one of the few political influencers I know who has had the bravery to publicly take on tough topics such as race and identity through social media, which again is filled with really opposite messages, and a lot of leftist self-love and virtue signaling. How can the rest of us stand up for truth? Do we just have to accept that we are going to potentially lose career opportunities, social media followers, and even entire friendships?
Yes, you will be canceled. Someone kind of corrected me the other day because I was talking to him in an interview, and I said, okay, people are afraid they're going to get canceled, so they don't want to speak out about XYZ, critical race theory, or how social justice is really misled and a perversion of justice. And he said, oh, they will get canceled. I was kind of looking for him to say, oh, you might not get canceled. But he was like, oh, you will. It's cancel season. Like, it's gonna happen. And so I've kind of stopped comforting people with the, hey, you never know. People might react fine when you say a girl is a girl, or a boy is a boy. Chances are they probably won't. Now, you might not lose your job. It might not be catastrophic. It might not be disastrous. I pray to God that it's not. I pray that it's just criticism and mean messages and things like that. But understand that as people get more and more deceived, the more averse they are, the more violently averse they are, to people who tell the truth. And so you will be canceled. You will be canceled, but it is absolutely worth it. Like, if you haven't read 1984 and you read the end, I won't give it away if you haven't, of what happens, you don't want that to be you. You don't want to start believing that 2 + 2 = 5. The only thing that is going to keep you sane, that is going to keep you grounded, is reminding yourself of what is true, which part of that is dismissing this lie of critical race theory, which says that every part of America is racist and you're either anti-racist or racist, that there's no in between, that treating people equally and kindly isn't enough, that if you are white or conservative, then you're complicit in injustice at all times in all ways, and you basically have to move to the left in order to be a truly loving, kind person. That's a lie. It's a lie that a man can be a woman or a woman can be a man. It's a lie that babies inside the womb are just clumps of cells to be discarded. Like, my encouragement to you is the least that you can do, the least that we can do, which is actually a lot, is to refuse to believe lies. Refuse to believe lies, refuse to accept lies, refuse to tolerate lies, refuse to tell lies, and refuse to allow the other people around you to be ignorant of what is actually true. If that's all we can do, if that's our only responsibility, then we should take that task seriously. And also realize that courage begets courage. When you speak up about the curriculum in your child's school, or what's something that's happening that is unjust or is wrong, there will be other people who speak up. Be willing to be canceled along with someone that you see being unjustly canceled. I say share the arrows with that person. If you see someone wrongly maligned, their character, their integrity, but they are being canceled or being persecuted, whatever, just because of an opinion that they hold, be willing to raise your hand to stand up amongst scared people and say, I agree with that. I agree. We have to be willing to do that for each other if we want to survive this post-truth, postmodern culture in which we live. It takes courage, but in my opinion, it's absolutely worth it.
Awesome. Yeah. Along those lines, there's a great question, part comment from Leslie about her own experience with children in the public school system, and teachers and administrators encouraging children to focus on self-love in a bad way. And we need to realize this is all over the place. Like, you're right, this is also in our public school system. So Allie, I know you probably have a lot of thoughts about that question, and you have addressed your thoughts on education in the public school system a bunch of times on your podcast. I'd encourage, Leslie, you to go back and listen to some of those episodes. But yes. Allie, we do have to let you go. I want to announce the winners of who are receiving a copy of Allie's book. They are Tammy A, Patty F, and Jane H. Our team will be sending you guys a copy. We'll be in touch with you to get your address and so forth. So look out for that. But Allie, before we let you leave, any last thoughts you want to share with the group?
Well, thank you guys so much for being here, for taking the time out of your day to both interview me, Kelsey, and also those of you who listened. I'm just very thankful for all of you. If you're interested in checking out the book, it is available on Amazon. I know a lot of people, me included, are trying to support other businesses as an alternative. And so you can go to alliebethstuckey.com/book. You can find all the places where you can purchase it online. It's also available at Hobby Lobby. Most Hobby Lobbies, I think, if not all, are carrying it. And so you can find it there. And my podcast, Relatable, comes out Monday through Thursday, usually about 1:30 or 2. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys again. Thank you so much for having me and for reading my book and for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Allie. I love listening to your podcast. It was an honor having you and a pleasure having this conversation. We're going to let you go.
Thank you so much.
Before I personally sign off, I just want to quickly mention that next month we will be discussing the best-selling book, Cynical Theories: How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody, with Helen Pluck-Rose, who co-authored the book with James Lindsay. So you can sign up for that over at iwf.org/book-club. We will see you there. And if you haven't already, please join our exclusive Facebook group called IWF Reads Book Club. It's a private group just for our IWF Reads members like yourselves. It's a great way to keep up with our books and events and to engage with other IWF Read members. You can, of course, suggest books for us to discuss there. We love hearing all of your feedback. I want to mention a bit more about Independent Women's Forum. This will just take just a minute. IWF is the leading national women's organization dedicated to developing and advancing policies that enhance people's freedom, choices, and well-being. We have an amazing staff of all women, some of the sharpest policy communications and legal minds in the country. We testify before Congress and state legislators, produce education materials, and publish articles about a number of different policy issues, many on the education issue, which we ended on today. We file amicus briefs in various court cases and frequently interface with the media to make the case for better public policy. When I do my Fox News and Fox Business hits from sitting right here during COVID, you can often spot Allie's book sitting right behind me. I love having it out there and being a proud supporter of Allie and her work. We also make a point to champion women from across the country celebrating their accomplishments and lives. If you haven't read our Champion Women profiles, I hope you'll check them out over at iwf.org under the About tab. We release two new profiles. We release a new profile every 2 weeks. So check out our website for more information and a lot of new daily content. I hope you'll sign up to become an email subscriber and mobile insider for special text alerts so you get the latest news, updates, and events from IWF. We, as conservative women, really appreciate your support in this space. We know we need more strong, independent thinkers out there, and we are all working hard to try to make all of your voices heard every day. So thank you all for being a part of this amazing book club community. We really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us. And again, thank our special guest today, Allie Beth Stuckey.